Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode. This is our around 1500 episode. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Rob, Madam Ali Royce, Jiri, and Mr. Fred. Jiri, if you open your camera, that will be helpful. Mr. Rob, today we are discussing about food future of food building resilient supply chain through innovation and collaborations. What's your thought about this supply chain through innovation and collaborations, as well as about this food industries or future of food?
Sure. Well, the big problem really right now, well, we got a couple of climate change, of course, is a huge issue, which is causing some areas that used to be great for farming to not be great. But the big issue we've got is largely due to logistics. We produce more than enough food to feed everybody. The amount of waste in the system is significant, up to 30% if you're talking about the last mile waste, where the homes are throwing away large amounts of food, but quite a bit higher when you include the losses due to transport. The food delivery system is largely based on the use of petrochemical supplies to fuel transport, which is very inefficient. I mean, you take a head of lettuce and you might have to take it 2,000 miles to the customer that's going to consume it. And that's terribly inefficient. And if we went back to the Middle Ages, food production and the people that consumed it were relatively close to you, I mean, right next to each other. So you didn't really have these massive transportation costs. Yes, for some things like spices and the rest, you had to go long distances, but for basic staples, that was all produced locally, and we can kind of do that again by going back to or looking at vertical farming and hydroponics, where you can grow food. Substantial amounts of food in the areas in which they're going to be consumed, and you get rid of a lot of that transport cost. Another issue, of course, is we've been working on just-in-time inventory, and that's kind of problematic, because just-in-time works really well if you have low local inventories, unless you have a shortage. And right now the logistics chain is too fragile for just-in-time. So instead you need to build up reserves, local reserves. So if there is a shortage, or if there's an inability to deliver food, or like right now where you've got a fuel shortage, and so transporting food becomes a problem, you've got enough of a reserve to carry through your community. And so that has to change as well. On agriculture, a lot of the problem with agriculture is just it's just wasteful. The flood irrigation in particular is just a massive waste of water, and very common. At the farm that I used to own, we had flood, and certain crops kind of lend themselves to it. But the problem with flood is it's very wasteful. Just going from flood to sprinklers, which we eventually did, reduced our water consumption dramatically, and then we have issues with regard to pesticides and fertilizer, where we put way more than was needed on the crops, and then you get runoff, which then pollutes your water supplies, and causes things like cancer and other problems downstream. And so you can go to technology where you microdose the plant life. You can reduce not only the amount of water you use, but the amount of fertilizer and the amount of pesticide that you use. Eliminating pesticide entirely is problematic, because the pests then eat the crops, which becomes a problem. But you can go to much safer pesticides as well. And then if you can track where your food is, then you can better manage it. And here's a case where blockchain comes in, and the IBM Food Trust is probably a good example of how you can use blockchain to monitor food supplies. Blockchain is basically a connected ledger that allows you to track payments and product through a complex chain of handoff to get to the final consumer. And anywhere through that process, you've got a good idea of where it is and what the quality is if you implement it properly. And then finally, we've got cellular agriculture for certain kinds of foods, like beef. You can grow the beef in labs, and it's actually gotten to the point where it tastes pretty good. Again, you can do that much closer to the people, and livestock has been one of the significant sources of gases that cause global warming, greenhouse gases that cause global warming. And if you can reduce the amount of cows, sheep, et cetera, that you're growing, you can reduce dramatically those greenhouse gases. But again, you also have transport. You've got the harvesting the meat in large factories, which often employ people at very low wages and not very safe conditions. And so that entire system could be altered to be much more sustainable and provide a higher quality food. Once again, produce more locally, so you cut back on transport costs. So implementing, at least in those 4 areas, could reduce substantially the amount of waste we have, and provide and create an ecosystem where the food is created much closer to the people that are consuming it. So you reduce dramatically the transport and logistics costs, and reduce substantially the amount of petrochemical amount of fuel that you're burning to transport it. All good for the environment.
Mhm. Thank you, Madam Ali Rice. What you want to discuss about this emerging technology for the supply chain of future of food?
Okay. Well, one of my things that I did look at is nature-based food production and the innovation surrounding that. So, so that was kind of using ecological processes and enhancing biodiversity, and using kind of traditional indigenous knowledge rather than overriding it through synthetic inputs or genetic engineering. So that, for me, that makes sense. And in England, there's a lot of organic farms. We live between Stratford upon Avon and Evesham, and Evesham's kind of one of the 2 gardens of England, and the other one's actually in Kent, which is where I was born, interestingly. So, and I think the thing is that for me, I think local produce, so that we actually, so I think one of the, because what's happening at the moment is they're building lots of new homes, and one of the ideas is to have garden villages, so that there's food and allotments and so orchards is kind of contained in the in what they develop, so that there's kind of an ecosystem that's already there, as well as the infrastructure for schools and shops, and so that people can sustain themselves in that spot without having traveling and sort of traveling all the time to the local town. So yeah. And I did actually research, the AI things, and what really matters. Essentially, there's climate volatility, geopolitical tensions as well, which is obviously much more obvious at the moment with the fuel and the way that that it's impacting the whole world because of what's going on in the Middle East. Population growth as well, and resource constraints as well. And I think that it's the resilience that matters, and how the supply chains are threatened. And I think when we had COVID, I think that was one of the times that all of us around the world actually saw kind of empty shop shelves, no loo paper for what I don't really understand, but anyway. But loo paper was kind of like a precious commodity, and so people were stealing them and everything. So I think so for me, with the basically. In the research that I did, it was saying that you needed resilient systems that didn't just react but were predictive, so that they, and there was diversified sourcing, so that you could reduce, failure, so that you don't actually put all of your eggs in one basket. Transparency as well from farm to fork, so you know what's happened to whatever it is you buy. And and it makes more sense to buy stuff that's actually produced in your own country than ours, because I go to Waitrose and most of the stir-fry vegetables are produced in Kenya, which is crazy. And then kind of having a built-in adaptability as well, so that if there's vulnerability, there's backups and and alternative ways of doing things. So I think the core driver with the technology is to use technology, biology, and natural processes. So the supply chains are more robust, and I think that instead of doing genetic engineering, I think kind of selective breeding is kind of better. But I think just kind of and it obviously depends. In our country, in England, we have like 4 seasons in one day. So 2 days ago it was in the 20s, and now it's 10 degrees. So the thing is, because we live in kind of a moderate climate, we very rarely have kind of extreme weather conditions. So we very rarely have kind of problems with, what happens with things that are grown. But I just think that, when Rob was saying, what we put on our food when we use kind of pesticides and fertilizers, I think it's crazy, that people have to wear masks and put all this poison all over the food that we actually buy, and we have to pay, an absolute fortune to get organic produce. And, years and years ago, you would never have questioned what happened to your food because it would have all been organic and either covered in soil and poo. So, so I think the thing is, I think there's a lot to be said to be going backwards in the way we used to do things, so that we kind of do traditional things and have more conscience on, on what happened. And, we live in a rural area, so we're surrounded by agricultural land, and there's sheep and cows and horses, so yeah, it's really interesting. So yeah, that's my first thought. So
Thank you. Jiri, what you want to discuss about the deployment of AI, blockchain, and IoT in the supply chain of food industry?
Yes, thank you for the word. I'm pleased to be here. Also, shortly, I hope will be joining us my friend from Africa, and I'm very excited to hear his opinion about this matter. But for myself, I graduated from the Agriculture University of Prague, and at that time, I was doing my diploma thesis from permaculture, which was many years ago, 20 years ago, but there we had a discussion if these local communities using permaculture like sun, water, wind, and these elements, if this is sustainable or if it's better to use genetically modified food. We had these conversations and discussions back at that time. For me, at this moment, is interesting, for example, the mission to the moon, where they are in the future will be like starting agriculture of its own. So this is very interesting field, which is interesting for me. And the sustainable agriculture, this is also very interesting for me. I'm interested in agriculture in Africa, in the local communities, and I'm in discussion with those guys. And for me to finalize this, your question was about AI and technology. I think this is very important, and the AI can help us greatly in these matters because it's important to use it as a helper, and it can be a great help. And with this on, I'm passing the word onwards. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you, Mr. Fred. What you want to discuss about innovative supply chain?
Well, thank you, Dr. Sharif, and hello to everybody. And Rob, thank you for an excellent presentation. All I can do is expound on some of it. We're talking about the blockchain method. I mean, I foresee a time in the future where trade between food organizations and this establishment will have its own form of currency between nations, which will, speed up individual. Yeah, I'm at a loss of words. Make it easier to find the people that need stuff. Take it from the supply chain, from the supply and demand. Your needs are going to be the most important, so this makes it easier for them to access a worldwide logistics platform where they can get the food they need from the people who have it.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. David Smith. Thank you. Mr. David Smith.
Oh, Dr. Sharif, thank you. I think the comments so far today have been excellent. And Rob, thank you for yours there. I think one of the things that's going to make blockchain in agriculture even stronger and more powerful is when you pair it with a bunch of Internet of Things type sensors and then put really personalized analytics around those sensors in it through the blockchain and others. Because what you then get is you get real-time reactions to what's happening in the fields, be they traditional fields or be the vertical farming and others like that, which we're seeing becoming more and more, or even within microgrids where they're being placed on rooftop farms and things, which I think is very exciting. But you also begin to see that across the supply chain, where you have tracking of it through the sensors across the entire chain. So you can see this type of IoT integration with temperature sensors, soil monitors, RFID cards, and others. But, particularly as I look at environmental monitoring, it not only gives you better control of the crop, but also affects the food safety and quality. And you begin to see that. The other thing is you begin to see is as you get closer to harvest and you're able to see down the supply chain to see when's the best time to sell your crops. Are there supply chain bottlenecks and others there? And combined with where we're going with AI, it's going to be very, very powerful there. The other thing that you begin to see is we see this coming together in a synergistic ecosystem where the AI, the blockchain, the sensors, the human capital, increasingly augmented by automation in planting, automation in harvesting, and others, are going to create a powerful, really self-reinforcing digital infrastructure for the food supply chain. And I think this is going to be very, very powerful. And yes, there's some things we need to do with it. We've got to address the cybersecurity vulnerabilities. We've got to look at interoperability issues as you begin to try to integrate this into your legacy supply chain systems and training. Most of what we talk about on your programs, Dr. Shreve, there has to be education, there has to be training, both at the people using the technology in the field and those down chain in it. So those are some of my really thoughts there, because it's really at a point where we're seeing this synergy of all this coming together.
Thank you. Mr. Rob, what role do smallholder farmers and local communities play in strengthening food system resilience, and how can they be better integrated into global supply network?
Well, they're all part of the ecosystem. And certainly local communities can and have gotten together to provide resources so that certain folks can grow their own food or their own vegetables at least. And in some cases, that we even had ranches where people could contract out and grow their own sheep and cows, and then have them slaughtered professionally and delivered food. In fact, our small farm, we had our sheep and cows were for our own consumption. We didn't sell that meat. I think the issue though with a lot of the small farms is operating economically. Well, I should say operating profitably. Many of the small farms here in the States are underwater. In fact, under the current administration, a lot of them are underwater because of the tariffs. And farms often operate on a very thin profit margin, and often drop into unprofitability if there's a couple of years of bad weather, drought, or excessive rain that wipes out the crops. And when we were growing oranges, frost was our enemy, and if you had an early frost, it could take out your entire crop. And having technology that can offset that, or growing crops that are more resilient to the kinds of weather changes the region has, is one of the ways that you offset that. Plus, a lot of the smaller farms, at least until the science advanced, weren't doing a good job of rotating crops, and so they were depleting the minerals that were in the soil. And then you had things like the Great Dust Bowl crisis that we had a number of decades ago, that were covered in the book The Grapes of Wrath, back in the time, my high school reading list. So farmers can make a lot of mistakes. So the best way, of course, for smaller farms is one that they need to be networked with each other. They need to collectively operate so that they have the information they need in order to grow the right crops. And then government subsidies have to be done intelligently, which hasn't always been the case here. So, for instance, we subsidize corn pretty heavily. Corn is a crop that does a lot will deplete the ground pretty aggressively, and then of course to try to consume that corn, we we came up with the idea of ethanol to be added to gas, which if you've ever worked on an engine that's had ethanol gas in it for a long period of time is a nightmare. It'll gum up pretty much everything. So we just did some really, I think, colossally stupid stuff. The corn focus was one of them. So government needs to intelligently advise farmers on what it is they need to grow, but with a grain of salt, the farms need to be organized. They need to be talking to each other, so they're aware of the geopolitical environment, at least with regard to food distribution and sales. So you're not, growing something that there's no market for, or growing something that is no longer appropriate for the region. Science has come a long way here, and you can reduce costs rather significantly by moving to some of the methods I mentioned earlier, like microdosing, to keep costs down. And labor, of course, has been a major problem in smaller farms as well. Often farms use immigrant labor, often illegal immigrant labor, because it's very cheap. And that's kind of problematic, because if you lose that immigrant labor, they get deported or arrested or whatever, then you're in a world of hurt. And large parts of Florida, California, and the Midwest are having that kind of experience here right now because of the lack of immigrants. So making sure that you're organized, you're networked, you keep up to date on the science, and that you use a high degree of fiscal responsibility, so you don't put yourself into so much debt that you end up losing the farm, and somebody else buys it for pennies on the dollar, which can be really problematic. It happens a lot here. So it's not something that you can just, farming isn't something you can just kind of go do like you could in the 1800s. It really requires a great deal of science, and if you do it right, it can be profitable, relatively low labor, and very satisfying if you like working in the soil. If you do it wrong, it's a debt magnet, and it'll drive you. I mean, it'll make you broke, if not drive you nuts and work you to death. So this is an area that, while it used to not require a great deal of education, requires a great deal now. And collectively, if the farms are organized, if they meet regularly, if they share information, they can overcome that knowledge gap and perform reasonably well, and in some cases compete with the large corporations that own massive amounts of land and farming right now, because they can gain through cooperation similar economies of scale. And recognize a lot of these large corporations are very tactical right now, instead of being strategic in the crops they're growing. In other words, doing things like maximizing the return from government subsidies, as opposed to doing something that's more sustainable and more customer oriented. And from the government standpoint, really going through some of these programs and making sure that they're incentivizing the right behavior and not the wrong behavior. Lots of money to not grow crops doesn't make a ton of sense long term. Short term, it can solve a problem, but long term, it can create big problems. And the United States has a history of creating problems like this through one administration that the subsequent administrations have to deal with, or putting in place programs that were all thought through, and then nobody wants to get rid of it because they don't want to piss off the farmers. That all becomes problematic. So thinking of doing simulations, thinking through the long-term strategic implications of the plans, and working to eliminate consequential damages becomes a big part of doing the farming right.
Thank you. Ali, how we can build up better communities, sustainable communities for food security?
Well, I think because I live in a rural community, and it's a small village that's a satellite village to a small town. And I think the thing is that the community is small, but it kind of looks out after itself. And I think the thing is, when we got locked down in COVID, I think that it really showed how the community pulled together, actually. So everyone looked out for each other. And I think the thing is, it's not until there's problems that you realise, that people have got your back. So I think in rural communities, buying local from local farm shops makes way more sense than doing anything else. And, the local store, absolutely, because at the moment, the head gasket's gone on our car, so my husband can get to work and back, but I'm stranded unless I get the bus somewhere. and the local store costs a fortune. So it's much easier. I know it sounds really. It's easier to go to a supermarket that's one of the good supermarkets than it is to buy locally, because their prices are just crazy, and they don't sell local produce. Whereas the farm shop that's in there, because we're next to a nursery as well, the farm shop tends to have low prices and produce that's seasonal and just harvesters. So I think the thing is that they're kind of key commodities. And I think the other, because we used to live on a dairy farm, and essentially one of the things that's really interesting over here is that the dairy farm, because the milk's such a commodity, the governments do subsidise so that the farms can afford to sell the milk, because they barely get any money for milk. And the farm that we used to live at, they actually converted from goats. Instead of having cows, they decided that they'd have goats, because they could double their income selling goat milk compared to dairy. And bizarrely, the goats were kept indoors, I think in constant daylight or something strange. But anyway, so essentially they didn't have to let them in and out to the fields and everything. But anyway, I just think that kind of communities, I think there's a difference between rural communities and their kind of reason to be and why they choose to live there, compared to somebody that lives in a bigger town or city. And I think the thing is, if you tend to live in a city, you tend to be completely distanced away from even questioning however what's on your plate got there and what happened to it in the process. So I think the thing is being conscious about the processes. And lots of people in the UK are quite heavily prone to being vegetarian, even vegan, and they've definitely reduced how much meat they have. Bizarrely, my son's just gone vegetarian since Christmas, and he was a massive meat eater. So and I think the thing is that obviously the cost for buying shopping, if you don't have protein on there, that's meat protein, is it's a lot less expensive. So essentially, I guess but I think kind of communities, I think in rural areas, farmers carry a lot of weight, and most farmers inherit their farms from their ancestors, and their family goes back hundreds of years. So it tends to be that most farms, are an inherited thing. And as like one of my friends has a brother, and her parents are so in the dark ages that when she loses her parents, she won't inherit anything, but her brother will inherit the whole farm and all its acreage. So I think there's a lot to be said, and things having to change, because that's just not fair. But essentially, no, I think communities need to be conscious about what they do, and ideally get kind of produce that's locally sourced, so that logistically it's not transported, it's fresh, and the other thing that I was going to say, in this area as well, we do have a lot of immigrants, and those immigrants that pick the crops from the fields do a job that most English people wouldn't do, and it's actually opened up the opportunity to live over here that otherwise wouldn't have been here. So there's lots of Polish people. One of the schools in Evesham has got a 3-form entry and a translator in every classroom, because there's so many Polish children that are in school. So essentially, one of the things that immigration does do is it gives people an opportunity to have a life that they otherwise wouldn't have had. So I know it can be kind of controversial, but that's a very, very, most people here wouldn't do that job, and they've come here and earned good money to give their families, a better opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Jiri, what you want to discuss about this community development?
Yes, I would like to welcome here most of my friends, Moses and Kiza. They are from Africa, and they will give very valuable insights on this problematic of agriculture. So I will pass the word to them without further ado.
Yeah, thank you. Moses and Kiza, what you want to discuss about the agricultural community development or supply chains in Africa? Moses? Yes, but I cannot hear you clearly.
What about there?
Your microphones work, but you're not loud enough. Now you're muted. You were unmuted before, but you're not putting out enough sound, so we can't.
What about
across.
there?
There you are.
That's-
We can hear you now.
Okay, thank you for agriculture in Africa, especially a country like Kenya. Agriculture contributes 70% of our GDP, and also is the backbone of our Kenyan economy. That is, manufacturing industries depend on agriculture. So this agriculture is also one way of one of the largest sectors that creates employment, both formal and informal employment to our people in Kenya, and it cuts across Africa. And let me be specific about our country, Kenya. We have so many women, young ladies who are working in flower plantations in Naivasha, who are earning a living. Most of them are single parents, some of them are widows. That is an employment part of it. When you go to places like Western Kenya, where corn, in your place you call it corn, but in our place you call it maize. Maize plantations are there. That maize is a staple food. We have a staple food for Kenyans called ugali. Maize contributes the staple food for our country. That is 90% of the Kenyans eat ugali coming from maize plantation. We have also beans. We have cassava, of sweet potatoes, and in the central part of Kenya, we have commercial farming. That is coffee, tea, which is meant for export, of course, and also the flowers, which are mostly Europeans are most consumers of the flowers from Kenya. So agriculture basically contributes a lot in our country. Level unemployment, it drives our economy. It contributes 70% of our GDP in our country. So if more efforts can be put in how to improve machinery, agriculture machinery, how to boost our farmers. Of course, our government has brought subsidies, fertilizer subsidies, and also recently they introduced seed subsidies, where farmers can access seeds at almost half price. The government pays almost half, and we also pay half. This has boosted a lot of food production, hence tackling the issue of hunger and starvation in most parts of the country. The commercial part, which is now the export part of it, which brings a lot of revenue to our country. We have avocado, which is sold in parts of Europe. We have our tea and our coffee, which is consumed in America, China, and some Asian countries. These things bring a lot of GDP, a lot of revenue to our government that is used to run our governments in Kenya. So maybe my colleague will also say whatever he does from his part of the world, or part of Africa for that matter. But this is basically what is happening in Kenya in terms of agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. Kiza, you want to add any point?
Thank you. Good morning, good evening, everyone. Yes, I don't know if you can hear me very well.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I'm Kiza Etisco. I'm from Kenya, but based in Kakuma refugee camp. Moses and I, we are all in Kenya, but different county. Where I am is a refugee camp in Turkana West. Yeah, let me introduce first myself so that I can go on the question. I'm Kiza from Kakuma refugee camp, working with YETC Youth Empowerment and Talent Center is a community-based non-profit organization, legal registration by the government of Kenya. We do education for orphans and the vulnerable children in Kakuma refugee camp. Also, we are doing feeding program for the orphans and the vulnerable. We are doing our self-contribution as a members of YTC to make sure a child gets something to put in a stomach. Because once the stomach is empty, a kid or child cannot concentrate what teacher is teaching at that time. So we have to put an effort on our contribution so that the child can get something to eat, even if it is small, but realize that is small can give them a force or a power to fall teacher. Also, we do talent development. In talent development, we are doing music dancer for youth. We are doing a music singer for youth. In music dancer, we have two groups, where is youth under 18, and we have also girls team below 18, where they are doing their practice, and we go to showcase on Saturday morning. Every Saturday morning, we have to showcase the talent for our youth. We are still teaching or train on our center. Also, we do new drama, comedy, and filmmaking for our youth for in our center. We teach also modeling for the young girls to be to build confidence on them. Once they can go somewhere where is the group of people and they can do something without fearing, because they have that experience to have confidence to do something. We are doing permaculture-based training where we come up with agriculture or kitchen garden, where we teach teenage single mothers to be self-resilient and food security. We give them some of the training and to say, just go to practice that we have done to you. Go to practice it in your compound. We have a small garden, because in Kakuma refugee camp, we can have a land. We cannot have a big land where we can go to practice our agriculture. Maybe we can go to the host community to buy a land, and the man to buy a land is not there as a refugee. So we have to practice our small land which we have in our area, so that we can practice on it and cultivate on it. And once we get something, they can go and buy it on the market and change maybe the food, then buy maybe the sugar, and so on. Also, we are doing entrepreneurship for vulnerable women, where we have come up with an idea to teach them about entrepreneurship, about these things of business, how they can do business. Because some of the vulnerable women, they did not get the opportunity to go to school, but they have an idea to do something. Because in Kakuma refugee camp is almost 300,000 refugees from different countries. Mostly is 15 countries which is in Kakuma refugee camp. And there we have come up with an idea to start a small group where we can do something to give them a power, or give them an empowerment to be self-resilient. As a YTC team, we have come an idea for doing banking table, where everyone come up with 200 Kenya shillings per week, so that we can contribute for that. And then once we get that amount, we can divide it by 2, and we give 2 women that amount we will get.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I want to give chance Mr. David Smith. What's your thought about this public-private partnership enhancement collaborations to mitigate disrupted like climate change, pandemic, geopolitical conflict in food supply chain?
Well, Dr. Sharif, as you know, public-private partnerships.
That 8,400, we divide it by 2. Everyone
Kiza,
can take
thank you. Kiza, thank you.
4,200.
Kiza, thank you. Kiza, thank you. In that situations, we want to give chance. We can understand what you are explaining. Kiza, thank you.
Oh, Dr. Sharif, let me start again. You know, public-private partnerships are a very powerful tool to use as you look at things like economic development, as you look at projects across infrastructure, and, you know, building a resilient food supply chain is definitely one where public-private partnerships can play, because a public-private partnership can help strengthen the system because they combine research, they combine reach, regulatory authority, and the long-term mandates of the governments with really the ability to move faster, to innovate, and the investment capabilities of the private sector. One of the companies I was CEO of, we were very involved and actually wrote software for public-private partnerships to enable us to do public-private partnerships to build toll roads across the United States. Because a public-private partnership has some unique characteristics where the government and the funding agencies and the contractors and companies building the projects and things want to be connected, but they don't want to see what each other's doing, which is really common as you do some of this. So it takes a special way to go there. But, you know, as you begin to look at P3s and the food system resiliency, they mobilize really very diverse capabilities of each of the stakeholders. So in the public sector, it's policy, it's regulations, it's infrastructure, it's pulling together the various stakeholders, it's risk sharing. In the private sector, it's the technologies, it's the logistics, it's the investment, and it's pulling together innovation across many, many different areas that can work there. And then public-private partnerships involve the society as well. It involves community engagement. Public-private partnerships thrive when there's standards you can work to. And one of the big things as I look at the community side of this, particularly in food value chain, is its capability building and capacity building. These have to really come together. And, you know, why the public-private partnerships work really well in the food chain, it helps mitigate disruptions. You know, climate change affects almost every stage of the food chain. And public-private partnerships can help by co-developing climate-resistant crops. They can help innovate with adaptive farming methods. At the top of the show, Rob mentioned some of the things with like indoor farming, vertical farming. I mentioned things like the rooftop farming and others. And these are things that public-private partnerships do really well. They also help fund infrastructure upgrades, things like irrigation, cold change, and how you begin to look at them. And they help really looking through how you manage particularly some of the geopolitical conflicts, concerns today, because the more you pull this together, it works there. So you see that a public-private partnership can improve farmers' income. It can strengthen local supply bases, and particularly with the technologies we've been talking about today, Dr. Sharif, with blockchain and others, it can enhance traceability and really help you go there. So, you know, you need to have a shared governance for public-private partnerships to work, and you need some transparent decision making. You need to be inclusive. You need to look at small holders, SMEs, communities, and you need to make sure you have an interoperable data system in there, which is really necessary for traceability, for management, for forecasting, and others. I can tell you from what I mentioned earlier, that was one of the things we learned as we wrote the software that ended up helping us manage public-private partnerships. Is the concept of public-private partnerships work very well, but you have to have the platform, you have to have the tools to make it ultimately successful. So Dr. Sharif, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fred, what you want to discuss about this public-private partnership approach?
Well, when you're talking public-private, you're talking government and corporation. It's a two-pronged approach. On one side, you have government, which is a needs for all based approach, and versus corporation, where the needs for the few, the bottom line, profit margin, what drives them. So there has to be a collaboration between the two that essentially states the prime goals. As far as climate change goes, we have to take the idea that we are going into a warming part of this, the history of this planet, which may force us to deal with vertical farming, as we're talking about, but in the terms of underground in tunnels, or if we're venturing into space, it would have to be an area protected from radiation. The same kind of thing can isolate different areas of small farms. As far as pandemics go, it can contain a pandemic to a localized area instead of allow it to spread around the world. And conflicts are going to be, like I said, between governments. You're going to be based on, we need to move this logistically where the corporations can see a profit, can provide. They don't go extinct trying to supply the chain that we need, and work with the people in deciding who does what, who gets the most of what. You're going to divide that into commodities from perishables to staples, wherein you could almost end up bartering for the staples. I'll trade you 100 bushels of wheat for 10 bushels of corn, that kind of stuff. And one of the most important things that I heard mentioned was the effect on soil depletion through nutrient depletion with why we're forced to rotate the crops. I saw this in myself as we raised corn on the San Joaquin River in the valley. I watched every year as more fertilizers got washed off into the water, and environmentally disastrous. So not only change the crops to find different sources of fertilizer that are compatible, natural organic fertilizers, and see that these local farms and these people have access to this. I thank you, Dr. Sharif, Rob, and everybody involved here. It's an honor to be here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Rob, my next question for you, what innovative approach can reduce food loss and waste while ensuring equitable distribution across both developed and developing nations?
Sure. Well, we mentioned blockchain before. David also mentioned putting in place sensor networks to be able to monitor the food both as it's being grown and as it's being transported. A lot of what we can do today really has to do with information collection and reporting. And if you know where the food is, what its condition is, where it needs to go, and whether it's likely to get there, you can make some very rapid determinations about how to reroute food that is spoiling so it gets to somebody that can consume it timely. You can identify problems in delivery much more rapidly. You can identify problems in the source farms as well, and make recommendations on how to mitigate them. For instance, if your yields are dropping dramatically, or if a frost event is coming in, a combination of timely notice and the application of appropriate technology can offset the losses. So today we have the opportunity to gather information at scale. something we didn't have when I was farming or growing up. You can collect and analyze massive amounts of information, and back when I was doing farming, that really wasn't even an option. But you need to put in place infrastructure to do that, and then you've got to get the farmers comfortable with the information that's coming out, because we're a long way from living off the Farmer's Almanac, which was a great book, but not particularly accurate. But maybe better than nothing, I guess. So in the end, it's just a matter of applying the technology we have, and you can simulate ecosystems at scale now, and by using simulation, you can see what's going to happen over anticipated weather events, anticipated conflicts. You can model these things, even if they're relatively unlikely. You can model the events out and put in place policies and plans to deal with an event that can mitigate a lot of the loss that might otherwise occur. So, for instance, if you've got a large migration of grasshoppers coming through crops every once in a while, you can put in place a mitigation program so that, one, you can identify the creation of the hazard fairly early on and perhaps mitigate it much more rapidly than you would otherwise. Same thing with fires. Our ability to put in place sensors and catch fires very early has existed for some years now. It's just a matter of putting the infrastructure in place, mounting the sensors, and then putting in place technologies like drone-based fire retardant delivery systems that can deal with the fire while it's still very small, instead of waiting until it's several acres large and beyond the capacity of ground-based equipment to mitigate. And even with regular fire retardant aircraft, if you get that aircraft in early, you only need to make a few runs to knock down the fire, even if it's in an inaccessible area. Where right now we often are responding to fires after they've gotten so large that even aircraft can't deal with the problem. So it's all a case of putting in place the sensor networks, providing the information analysis, doing simulations at scale, and putting in place plans that can address some of these problems while they're still small and addressable, as opposed to waiting until they're a crisis and exceed your resources to mitigate. So it's a combination of technology, cooperation, collaboration, and training that gets us there. And the end result is actually far cheaper than dealing with a lot of these problems the way we do now, because a lot of times when we reach a catastrophic state, the amount of cost that has to go into revitalizing the soil, dealing with large scale intrusions of grasshoppers and other pests, and then identifying perhaps problems with airborne diseases that can take out crops. The entire orange farming capability of California was taken out by a disease called quick decline when I was young, which is why we lost our orange groves. And I guess Florida is experiencing much of that today. And if you can catch this stuff early, you can mitigate it. The way we do it now is we kind of catch it late, and then we end up having to destroy large amounts of material in order to stop the spread of a particular disease, and that just isn't sustainable. So using technology, we can reduce costs, we can lower the incidence of these disasters, and we can more intelligently deliver food to the people that need it.
Thank you, Ali. What's the innovative approach we have for food securities, and what's your closing remarks for today?
Okay, well, one of the things that I looked at was that soil, healthy soil, and because if you've got nutritional soil, you get nutritional crops. If you don't have nutritional soil, then the nutrients in what's produced aren't there. So I think that kind of restoration of ecosystems and leveraging like beneficial microbes and stuff like that, so that the natural biodiversity of insects and birds and animals that live in the area where the crops are grown and do their thing, and then and everything's healthy. And the other thing that I looked at actually is the sea, and it's one of the things that's poised to become a cornerstone of tomorrow's food system apparently. And And there's all kinds of solutions that are regenerative, like vertical ocean polycultures and scaled seaweed production and aquaculture and all kinds of things. So for me, I think ethically and morally, I think we should kind of go with nature and try and help her with, I think AI is great if we can monitor things so that you know what's going on and we can get there early so that we limit kind of damage. But I think the thing is that it's much better to go with nature than not. And I think the only thing that I would question actually is when they, that they can use cellular agriculture to cultivate seafood so that they've got the cells, but they don't kill the animal. That in some ways there's something that makes sense to me because I wouldn't want to kill anything, and I'm predominantly vegetarian. But in the other, I just question how that impacts on I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I always worry about stuff that's kind of messing with nature. And I had a Native American wedding, and I think one of the things that the Native Americans did is they honoured the sacrifice of whatever they ate, and when they ate something, they used all of it. So they used the fur and the bones, and So I think that there's something to be said in that, really. And there's lots of kind of controversial things, but I think the thing is the food systems. Actually, going back to Rob's first thing, it's really true. So one of my biggest mentors actually, who's really impacted me, is Roger James Hamilton, that runs Genius U. And one of the things that he said is there's easily enough food and resources in the world for everyone, but there's a distribution problem. And I know in Europe there's massive food waste mountains. Like if the bananas aren't a certain size and shape, they just get discarded. The amount of food, unopened food, that's thrown in the bin in the UK is crazy. And shops, big supermarkets and local stores just throw away food when there's people that are trying to decide whether they need to heat their house or eat food. It's crazy. So the solutions are all there, but you need joined up thinking to figure it out. And it's not difficult. You may as well give stuff away if you're going to throw it in the bin. So, I think the thing is that there needs to be entrepreneurs that figure out where the gaps are and pull them together so that there's less problems and more solutions and, less waste. And the thing is, I think the thing is the system needs to look at where the gaps are first and utilize what we're producing. And in the Western world, we're such consumerists, that consumption's gone crazy. And I think the thing is we need to really rethink that too. So I think there needs to be a conscious level of where we're at and where the waste is, and how to improve what we do already. And maybe we don't need to do as much as we think. We just need to look at the system.
Thank you. Fred, what's your closing remarks for today? Mr. Fred? In that situations, I want to give chance. Mr. David, my last question, how can policy framework and international cooperation support sustainable and adaptive food system for the future generation? And what's your closing remarks for today?
Well, Dr. Shree, thank you. Very good program today. It's one that there is high need for as we look there. So some of the innovative approaches is we're really beginning to look at the fact that we need innovation across the entire value chain, from the preparation to production to shipping to consuming it. And we've seen strategies, at least here in North America, with things like the USDA and EPA and in academia looking at how to mitigate some of those. So how do we modernize the storage and the cold chain infrastructure? There has not been a lot of work done there anywhere, really. And particularly when I look in third world nations, very far behind on all of those. And particularly as you modernize that, you need to make sure we have sensors in there. You need to have climate smart and precision agriculture. So the integrations of the sensors, the predictive analytics from AI, and improved crop management is one of the things that we have to do. And we need to look at, from the government side, how to implement new policies that adjust and help us do this. We need to see digital traceability and monitoring today, and how to begin to get there. And particularly from the retail side to the household, we need to look at consumer education. We need to look at enhancements in academia that steers research into these areas. We're going to see more and more things with smart packaging, and I believe that will really help. I'm amazed of how much food gets thrown into landfills every day around the world, and we need to do a better job of looking at that. And we need to see, how do we put data-driven strategies in place to solve these issues, Dr. Sharif? Because with the digitalization we have today, with the sensors, with the fact that we can now bring immutable transparency of that data into place, those are the things that will let us put the partnerships in place to solve this problem and to bring true innovation. But to make it all happen, collaboration is one of the key elements. So thank you for letting me be part of this today, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. Yes, Moses, what's your closing remarks for today's session?
Thank you so much. Again, I didn't give my introduction in the first place. I'm Moses Okirwe Kasiba, the founder, the director of Gilead Inclusive Global Organization. So we engage in a number of activities and humanitarian programs like agriculture, health, education, human rights, access to water and sanitation, poverty alleviation, among others. So we are a non-governmental organization registered in the Republic of Kenya. I am so happy today to having been brought to this forum where a number of issues have been discussed about Africa. And this is the greatest honor that you people have had for our continent, Africa. So with those few remarks, I'm very thankful and grateful for having been part of this forum today. Thank you all, and God bless you.
Thank you. Mr. Fred, are you with me? Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. I request all of our audience, please share our content with the government agency, corporation, and academia. Thank you, Mr. Rob. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Mr. Fred and Mr. David Smith. And thank you, Moses. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye, y'all.
Bye.